Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Johnson edition. We turned out a poem 667, Bloom Upon the Mountains, stated. We're back to another sunset poem, back to poem 307 and 308. And in this poem, we're going to find ourselves paying close attention to the fact that, as Judith Farr has pointed out, Emily wrote from a bedroom where she could see the sunset. Farr has said it this way, Emily from her bedroom was, quote, in daily communion with sunrise and sunset as they colored the Pelham Hills. Emily, it seems in this poem, is writing this particular sunset poem while actually watching the sunset. We'll see it in line 13. She'll call it while I state, as in to stand, while I'm writing this poem. And the poem will now develop in a very remarkable way that we'll want to get into. The opening of a flower is like the sunset on a mountain. It's quite a magnificent poem in this regards. Now, I'm making some assumptions here. One of those is that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net. The left-hand side is Chats with Emily. Hopefully you worked through our set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 666 poems we just finished with all Tenerife. And if you have done that work with us, then you'll be reminded of Emily's love, her dynamic love of nature. And immediately we think of her contemporaries, especially Emerson and Thoreau, and their love of nature. In the same way that a flower opens up and blooms, the sunset on a mountain. Watch this. Bloom upon the mountain, stated, blameless of a name, efflorescence of a sunset, reproduced the same. Seed had I, my purple sowing should endow the day, not a tropic of a twilight show itself away. Who, for tilling to the mountain, come and disappear, whose be her renowned or fading witness is not here, while I state the solemn petals, far as north and east, far as south and west, expanding, culminate in rest. And the mountain to the evening fit his countenance, indicating by no muscle the experience. The brilliance of this poem is that she brings together two images. A flower opening, and then the petals falling and dying. And the sunset that is hitting a mountain. And of course, we live in a place where we get to see this regularly. Of course, we think of our own Cloud Peak, don't we? It's brilliant the way the poem is constructed. By the way, notice the closed form here is quite remarkable. So we have, for example, bloom, blameless, seed, should, who, whose. Of course, we have the name, same. We have day, away. Right? I mean, she's playing brilliant games here. In the same way, she'll make the argument, and I love the way that this breaks down. In the same way, she'll make the argument that as the sunset is on the mountain, the effervescence or the blooming of a flower bursts forth. It will develop for a while, and then of course the flower will die, right? The sunset is in some ways what we might say an unlisted flower, but without a name, right? And then she moves on to say if she could sow the seed of the flower, sunset, right? Her regal sunset of purple would enrich us all day long, and there'd be no need to travel away from Amherst at all to see a tropical twilight. And then her next section is, no one knows who comes to the mountain to till the soil for the sunset to bloom, or who should have the fame for this brilliant blooming, and then of course the fading of the sunset. And in the end, all she can say is that while she's writing the poem, standing there, the petals of the sunset fill the whole sky before dying away in rest, and the mountain itself gives no indication that he's ever been moved by the experience. Again, so much of this is taking us back to our study of 307 and 308. So she'll begin with the bloom on the mountain and the blameless without the name. There's no name of this flower. Effervescence of a sunset, only use of effervescence is here. Reproduced the same. By the way, going back to poem 666 with the purples and the mountains and the sunsets. Seed had I, she'll say, of my purple sowing should endow the day, not a tropic of a twilight show itself away. This is all that I would need. I don't need to go anywhere else. This is enough for me. Who for tilling to the mountain come and disappear, whose be heard. Notice the sunset here is the feminine, the mountain is the masculine. Renown or fading, witness is not here. And then she'll tell us, while I state the solemn petals, many have read this as while I'm writing. Far as north and east, her idea of geography. Far as south and west, expanding might be the key word of the poem. Culminate in rest. Of course, we're back to her idea of rest or stillness. And the mountain, finally to finish, to the evening, fit his countenance. They go together, indicating by no muscle or memory the experience. In other words, there's a remoteness here, much like in poem 666, huh? The mountain isn't moved by the blooming or the death of the sunset. Mountains don't care as the brilliant sunset happens. I think our argument in two ways that nature is amazing and there's a symbiosis there, but it's only us as humans that really fully, and we've commented on other nature poems that she makes this observation, only us as humans who put this level of beauty and awe on top of an experience. The mountain doesn't care, right? The mountain is clueless as to the beauty and the majesty of a sunset on it. At 2B, again, the meter of the poem, it's a fun poem to read. I hope that you guys will go and play with it on your own. At 3A, I mentioned, of course, 307 and 3A. Go back to our study of those two, sunset poems. And again, we mentioned some of the poets, contemporaries who love nature so much. Emerson, Thoreau come to mind, and even Walt Whitman, of course. Finally, at 3B, what is for you a sunset that plays this game? And the next time you see the sunset on the mountain, I hope you'll remember this poem. Thank you.